Tory spending. Because this morning you have just junked everything you believed in, haven't you? You've junked your 2% limit on borrowing every year. You've junked your balanced budget, which was always just an aspiration that get kicked into the touch every year anyway. And you've junked your debt falling as a percentage of GDP. Every rule you've lived by, gone in a little fire this morning.
That's not true, Andrew. Let me
take you through. Small bit of that's not true.
Let me take you through the fiscal rules we've just announced, and then we can have a discussion about them. But let me just say one thing. Corbyn's Labour Party have a real problem, because in that 5-year term, that they think they're going to...
No, I'm sorry. I don't want to hear you on Corbyn's Labour Party.
Fine. But they're going to have
we've done that. And I've tried to do a robust interview with them on that, and there were some major questions unanswered.
Yes.
I'll ask you again.
Yes.
Why have you junked your 3 major fiscal rules?
So I'm going to answer, but you didn't ask about the 2 referendums, because they're going to spend the first year on.
Please,
let me just get to the rules.
this.
Right, let me get to the rules. So the first rule is that day-to-day expenditure will not be higher than what the tax take is into the Treasury.
Which is also Labour's rule.
Well, fair enough. Let me just go through them. You asked me to go through them, so give me a chance.
But that's the rule at the moment, too.
Just allow me to carry on to be able to...
So that's one.
That's one. Right. The second rule is we have an opportunity to invest in infrastructure, and that what we will do is make sure that we borrow to invest in infrastructure. That's on the asset side of the balance sheet, 3% of GDP on average over 5 years. That's the second rule. The third rule...
Which, can I just point out, breaks your previous rule that borrowing would not exceed 2%.
Well, I'm going to get to the final rule, which is very important as well. You're right to point that out, but it's a good time for us to do this responsibly. Why? Because the final rule, we will look at the interest rate that we're paying on our debt, and if it exceeds 6% on average for a sustainable period of time, then we will reassess our borrowing. They are very responsible rules to make sure that we invest in the future, we deliver Brexit, unblock the blockage, right? Then invest in infrastructure and do it in a responsible way.
Yeah, if it's a good time to do this now, when for the moment interest rates on government bonds are low. 10 years are about 0.76 at the moment, though they could spike up. We'll see if others follow Pidcock. But if it's a good time now, why was it not a good time in 2015 when bond yields were low, and 2017 when bond yields were low, and Labour said we could do it and should do it? Why was it not good then and good now? Because we could have had 4 years of infrastructure spending, rather than you scrambling to catch up with Ed Miliband and now John McDonnell.
Well, we have had infrastructure spending. So to frame this as if we've had nothing and now we're doing it, that's not true.
Why was it good? Why is it good now, but not good then?
I will absolutely answer your question directly. Today's deficit is 1.2% of GDP. It's about 25 billion.
No, it's not.
Right. Yes, it is.
I'm sorry.
In 2019.
The latest deficit is now 2.3% of GDP. It's already above your rule, which is why you stopped the OBR from publishing the figures this morning.
It's down by 4/5. That's the difference.
Excuse me.
The difference is...
No, I'm sorry. You cannot get away with giving false facts on television. The deficit this year is already larger than last year's. And it's 2.3% of GDP. It's already above your existing fiscal rule and rising.
It is down by 4/5 is my point, which is why it's a good time.
From 2010.
It's a good time for us to actually have these new rules for a 5-year period of investment as we unblock the blockage of Brexit and deliver that. That's the real choice. Do we want this done?
I love it when politicians from all stripes are fighting for people's votes in the north. I think that's a healthy thing. But isn't the basic truth that the UK is way behind other OECD countries in terms of growth and exports, that our investment rate is half the average, we're in the relegation zone on growth, and actually your proposals I think would bring us somewhere to the middle of the OECD league. Labour's proposals would bring us near the top. It's as simple as that. So it's a case of priority.
All on borrowed money.
Do we think it's important to borrow to invest to get growth? Because we can talk about tax and spend. I don't like tax cuts for the rich. You don't like people spending on the NHS and schools.
That's rubbish.
But we could
That's
talk...
not true. We're putting more money into the NHS, £34 billion.
But we should be talking about growth, and there should be a cross-party consensus on the importance of investment and industrial
Let me bring in
strategy.
Anthony. This wing of the party, this party, has been quite quiet. This is a sea change in our political discourse now, isn't it?
Correct.
You've now got a bit, instead of one party posing as the fiscally responsible in their language, and the other saying, no, we could spend more, we now have a bidding war as to how much you can spend.
Yeah.
That's a huge change in the past 10 years.
So it's bread and circuses, as we've seen at other times when the parties have been very close together. And clearly Labour, but at least Jeremy Corbyn, rightly or wrongly, deeply believes in public spending as the way. He's a very different kind of Labour leader to Tony Blair, for whom fiscal rectitude was the name of the game. So he believes in it deeply, and clearly Boris Johnson and the Conservatives are matching that. Now, they can disguise it any way they want to, but it would be nice if we just heard the truth.
We seem a long way away from Ed Miliband in 2015, who felt constrained by the deficit, who felt he couldn't spend too much, that he had to be partly on Tory territory when it came to this. That now seems a bit like the reform of the Corn Laws, doesn't it?
We talked about the deficit non-stop. On these kind of shows, it was every single day for years. And now it doesn't come up that much. I mean, that grilling, it did. Felt like we all needed popcorn there. But
This is the BBC, we can't afford that.
And today's deficit, according to the ONS, is, by March 2019, is 25.5 billion, according to 1.2% of gross domestic product. That's what I said.
No, I'm sorry. March 2019 was the end of the last financial
That's
year.
what I said.
We're now in the 2019-20 financial year, and the deficit's already 2.3%.
But that's
it's
what I said
rising.
to you.